This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
John Stewart, president of the Florida Bar, on this edition of Conversations. In 2019, John Stewart became the 71st president of the Florida Bar. Now, one could argue that Stewart was destined to become an attorney, considering both his maternal grandfather and his father practiced law. But Stewart and his generation are facing issues that would have been hard to imagine in his grandfather's days. Much of those centered around technology. The legal profession has not been immune to the disruption caused by the internet. In his role as president of the Florida Bar, Stewart is looking at how the traditional practice of law can work in tandem with today's technology. In addition to his role as president of the Florida Bar, Stewart is also a partner with the law firm Rossway Swann. We welcome John Stewart to Conversations. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let me begin with kind of that 10,000-foot question for the layman out there. What is the bar?
Well, the Florida Bar is an organization that really governs all attorneys in the state of Florida. We were an arm of the Florida Supreme Court, so we're sort of a quasi-governmental agency formed by the Supreme Court in 1949 as a mandatory group, meaning every single Florida lawyer must be licensed by the Florida Bar.
Okay. And how did you get involved? How did you become president?
Yeah, well, it's a journey. Really accidentally. I'm a little bit atypical. From a small jurisdiction. I'm in Vero Beach, and also from a small firm. And typically the presidents tend to be more larger jurisdictions, sometimes larger firms. But I saw an advertisement in the Florida Bar News, the newspaper that the Florida Bar publishes twice a month, about a seat for the Young Lawyers Division Board of Governors, and thought it sounded interesting. So I ran and was elected from my circuit. And 6 years later, I ended up being president of the Young Lawyers Division Board of Governors. And thought that was more than I ever anticipated getting through in my career. I was happy to ride off into the sunset. Right. But the seat for the Board of Governors, which is a 52-member body that governs the bar, along with the president and president-elect, became open, meaning there was another race. So I ran again and won. And, then about 11 years later, I became president of the Florida Bar.
Yeah. What do you think your most important role is as president?
I think it's really connecting. It's two parts: connecting with the public and connecting with our members. I think really people enjoy hearing from you, seeing you, meeting you, and hearing a little bit about what's happening at the bar.
Right. People are always kind of say, well, they hear about that, the bar, the bar did this, or the bar
Right.
sanctioned this person, or whatever. But probably the average person just really doesn't understand the inner workings of what goes on. What would you tell that person out there so they have a better grasp of it?
Well, I think most people don't realize that the primary driver of the Florida Bar is protection of the public. Mm-hmm. I mean, that really is our primary focus, and then of course a close second is serving our members, the Florida lawyers. But assuring that the public gets proper legal services, that lawyers' trust accounts are maintained properly, that we follow the necessary advertising restrictions so that they're not misled. That's primarily what we do, and in a currently about a $50 million budget, none of which comes from any taxpayer money. It's all Florida attorneys' fees. About $25 million, about half of it is spent on lawyer regulation, lawyer discipline. So assuring that the lawyers are meeting what we expect, the high ethical and professional standards that the public should expect of lawyers.
You said the word advertising, and I know there's been a lot of talk about the various ads that occur, particularly on television. Talk a little bit about advertising and what are the regulations? What can an attorney get away with?
Well, advertising is a complicated issue in my mind. I think most people would not believe that Florida has the strictest lawyer advertising regulations in the country. If you look at the advertising on billboards or radio or news, you probably assume that it's really not. Right. But the U.S. Constitution, the right to free speech, the U.S. Supreme Court has said allows for advertising. So we have to fall within the strictures of that. But it's an interesting dichotomy because now in the intro, you talked a little about technology and how it's affecting the practice. And so there's a lot of legal technology companies that are not lawyers, not lawyer owned or operated, that are providing legal related services at least, that have really no restrictions. I mean, they're not governed by the Florida Bar, they're not governed by the advertising rules, et cetera. And so, those advertising rules are intended to protect the public, to make sure that they don't get lawyers, who should be advertising in ways that are not proper.
And I want to get a little bit more into that in just a moment, but let me go back for a second. There was a time when attorneys could not advertise in mass media, is that?
That is correct, yeah. That was before my time.
Okay.
But yeah, there was, and I think not only were they probably prohibited, and then there were some Supreme Court cases that said no, attorneys are like everybody else. They have the right to free speech. But of course, in the passage of time, I think attorneys probably just advertise less. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah. Because, and you said that Florida has some very strict regulations. I've been to other states, and some of the things that you see attorneys advertising is like, wow. I mean, it's almost like they're promising people, if you come see me, I'll get you a new motorcycle or a new car or something like that. How are they able to get away with that?
Well, I mean, they have their own rules, right? I mean, so even as strict as we are, as you can see, there's still a lot that's just permitted by the Constitution. So, we did an interesting study. We actually surveyed in defense of one of our advertising regulations that was challenged by some of our lawyers as being too strict. We actually surveyed the public by hiring a really reputable national survey company, because our belief is that at a minimum, we need to make sure we protect those most vulnerable to what might be sort of deceptive advertising practices. We wouldn't want to see that. Right. And what the survey revealed is that those individuals are the least susceptible to it, because they have to live in that environment. They have to buy their cars, at buy here, pay here lots, and they rent to own TVs. And so they're not generally susceptible to sort of that misleading advertising. So that was a real eye-opener for us, because the people that we were really striving to protect through these regulations really didn't need it. Really
interesting. Going back to what you were saying just a couple of moments ago about how technology has, changed the legal profession. It's changed everything, it seems, in today's world. But talk a little bit about that. What's the biggest change that you've seen in your career, technology-wise?
I think the biggest change, obviously, is the pace in which we interact and deal with our clients. There is no untethering yourself from work anymore. Yeah. We all have our cell phones, and we all have our laptops and our iPads. And so while that adds some value in the sense that I can keep in touch with a client when I'm on vacation or just out of the office, and so there's not a disconnect, at the same time, the inability to disconnect yourself from work, I think, creates its own fair share of challenges.
Yeah. When we talk about how, like some of the other providers you were talking about, that don't necessarily have to live under the same rule as a practicing attorney, expand on that a little bit about like some of these services and things that are available.
Well, I mean, there are a wealth of online legal service providers that either just provide forms for people to fill out, or connect people to different types of other legal services. But the challenge is that field, because it's fairly new, really, is, I would say, wholly unregulated, because the Florida Bar doesn't regulate it, because they're not lawyer owned or operated, and there aren't really any other entities that it neatly fits under as far as regulation. So I think that presents its challenges, because they don't have maybe the advertising restrictions, so they can reach the consumers a little bit more easily in the ways that consumers are expecting to be reached, the way they're expecting to be advertised to. And so for that reason, I think, while I'm a believer that the changes in legal technology add a lot of benefits, there are some of those cautionary tales where we have to make sure that we are protecting the public.
And for the public and the consumer out there, when they take a look at one of these various services, and I'm not knocking any of the services, but I'm just simply asking you, what should they look for? What should they be aware? Because at what point, or maybe they may think they're getting a good deal, but maybe this doesn't hold up to the legal strength that it should.
Well, that's really the challenge, right? Is that I don't know how they would know. Right. That's really the problem. I mean, that's the one of the aspects in Florida that we've been working on is how to bring some of these legal service technology companies into the fold, because I do think that they provide a valuable service for certain individuals. And for example, we've recently passed a rule. It still requires Supreme Court approval, so it's not a rule regulating the Florida Bar until it does, but the Board of Governors has passed it, which says that the legal service technology company can only provide forms that have been either approved by the Florida Supreme Court or reviewed and approved by a Florida lawyer in good standing. So that way, at least the consumer would know it meets the requirements of Florida law.
Right.
Now, whether they can fill it out correctly or not is a different story, but at least they know the product itself is proper.
And would that be a kind of a cautionary tale for the consumer out there, even though it may, on the surface, seem somewhat simple because of the various intricacies involved in the world in the legal world? You have to be careful about doing that, right?
I think it's tough, right? I think it's sometimes filling in blanks is easy. Sometimes the blanks have some significant meaning. But then, of course, a lot of times the boilerplate language, it may say that you have to resolve your dispute in California. Well, as a Florida resident, you may not find that very convenient, to say the least.
Right.
So I think those are some issues that if it was either approved by the Florida Supreme Court, and there are some forms approved by the Florida Supreme Court, or reviewed and approved by a Florida lawyer, then that, I think, would dissipate a lot of those concerns.
Yeah. What area of the public most needs the legal profession?
We see it most in family law. I would say there's a tremendous amount of what we call pro se litigants, which means people representing themselves, and it's just really challenging. It's in the family law arena, and I'm not a family law lawyer, so I'm not an expert, but if you have kids, you have issues of child custody arrangements and child support payments, and so if you're going it alone, it can be really challenging. And so I think that is an area where we really need to find a lot more people and a lot more lawyers connecting to get help, and it would help, frankly, unburden the court system as well. It takes a lot longer for pro se cases to work through the system.
And, you hear a lot about that kind of stuff, and a lot of times it becomes a money issue. Somebody says, well, I can't afford an attorney.
Right.
Well,
it's interesting. I think that's more perception than reality. I really do believe that. Certainly there are a lot of attorneys that I can't afford. Right. But that being said, there are a lot of attorneys that are providing work at a very reasonable price point, and people don't realize it. Attorneys do a very poor job of describing what they do and what their fees are. And it's something we need to improve upon. I think if we were much more transparent about that, people would realize really how affordable a lot of these services really are.
Right. So if you're a consumer out there and you're looking, is there a way that you can contact the bar and say, hey, give me some advice on what I should look for? Or?
Well, the bar does have a lot of consumer resources about hiring attorneys, that are available on the website, which I know will be part of the show. And in addition, we have a lawyer referral service where people can connect with attorneys with no obligation. They can just make an initial connection, and if they like the attorney and they can work out the arrangement, then that's another resource. And I think those are invaluable. I think those are going to continue to grow, and so there is a lot of information on the Florida Bar's website. Yeah.
What are you seeing in technology right now that you're most excited about that will help propel the legal profession?
I see two things really. One is as attorneys become more technologically savvy, I think that group of citizens, the consumers of legal services who aren't getting them from lawyers, are going to find a lot more attorneys who are going to be able to provide those services at a lot more reasonable price point, because they're going to use technology to be more efficient in their processes. Right. And so I think that's going to be just really helpful in making sure that more consumers who need legal assistance are getting it. The other area, which is really fascinating, is really sort of inward-facing for lawyers, is sort of artificial intelligence and how that's being used in legal research. I think we have a new Florida Bar member benefit company that licenses IBM Watson technology for legal research, and it changes everything. You can review thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of documents through the computer. It's not human driven. get ideas about what are proper defenses or what are proper responses. Kind of narrows your focus, which is good also for the consumer because the attorney's spending less time.
Right, right.
And it's just a really interesting industry that's really just starting, I think, in legal.
Yeah, I'd like to get you to elaborate a little bit more on that because I have read some stories about that, about how the AI is going through just reams and reams of information that and it's just almost unfathomable. What are you seeing in the real world with that?
Well, for example, it's more in the federal court system right now, in the state court system, but it'll pass to the state court system eventually. For example, artificial intelligence can review every single opinion that a federal judge has written. And so then you can put in keywords, and that way you can find out with certain keywords every single way that a judge has ruled on a particular matter, or maybe words or phrases that judges particularly like, because they write them a lot in their opinions, and sort of you can either help make a decision whether or not it's a case that you should bring or not bring, or how you should frame the case. So it's really fascinating. I mean, they can drill down into unbelievable minutia very quickly.
Wow. And what is the cost of that if you're a law firm?
It's not terrible. I mean, it's almost all of these legal technologies are sort of subscription based, meaning it's sort of like leasing a car. So, we don't own product anymore, right? We just so it's, I think really, and that's really one of the great parts of legal technology is it's become a great equalizer between mid and small size firms and some of the larger firms because it's not cost prohibitive for most lawyers and law firms to have fairly modern technology.
So I would imagine that would really come into play if you have a huge case, maybe against a major corporation that just says, well, I'm just going to bog down that small firm with documents and things of that nature, huh?
Yeah, it does. There's something in the industry called technology assisted review, which just simply means that you can basically feed these papers into the computer. I mean, it's not like feeding them into the computer, but you scan them in, and they process the words, and they have understanding from doing millions of pages of documents, sort of what key words are you should be looking for. And so it really is a pretty fascinating time.
And I guess in some ways people say, well, that's going to take some jobs away perhaps, but it might open up some other opportunities, right? You think?
Yeah, that's it exactly. I mean, I tell my lawyers all the time that, what it really does is allows them to kind of elevate their practices. Lawyers add the most value when they're using their intellect, relating to strategy, relating to helping people solve problems. It's not grinding through 10,000 pieces of paper, looking for some key words.
Right. Interesting. Now, I've read over the years, too, that a fair amount of, perhaps paralegal type work has been offshored. Is that the case? Is that a trend?
I think it's definitely happened. I don't know that it's a growing trend. I mean, I think it will still continue. I mean, there's a price point there that makes sense for certain types of work. And, I think there's nothing improper about it inherently as long as the attorney-client privileges are being protected in both the transmission of that data, to wherever they're happening to send it to, and then the people that are reviewing it have some relationship such that they're keeping those attorney-client privileges, then I think it's okay. Right. But I think actually with the advent of what we just talked about with the technology, you can do that so much more just in-house now that's probably serving less of a useful purpose.
Interesting. Is there a particular area of law right now that you think is opportunistic if you were a young person who wanted a career in the legal field?
Yeah, I'm a believer. So you mentioned that my grandfather was an attorney, and my father. I still work with my father, by the way. Obviously, when they were practicing, it was more of a general practice. Lawyers did a wider variety of types of work, and then became super specialized on. Most lawyers did. I think there's a real growing practice and trend toward becoming a little bit more of a generalist again. Most of Florida lawyers are in small firms, 5 lawyers or less. I think it's about 65% of our almost 108,000 members. They're almost also in rural communities, I mean, they're not in these high density communities. So, to be more of a generalist and to be able to do the family law for when the people need it, or provide, wills and trusts when they need it. And you can never be a one-stop shop, but you can, be a 3 or 4 stop shop. Right. And I think that's a real real growing trend is almost to kind of go back a little bit.
Yeah. You always hear people say, there are too many lawyers. Is that true?
You know, you know, it's an interesting, you know, people do say that, and I think, you know, my response to that is the studies they're really unequivocal, and it's not just Florida. I mean, it's nationwide, but even just using Florida, about 80% of people that need lawyers that can afford to pay lawyers at some level, and that includes certain small businesses, are not using lawyers for whatever reason. Either they choose not to, or they don't think they can afford a lawyer. So, I mean, there's a huge amount of unmet legal need. I think if everyone that could possibly afford and need a lawyer went to a lawyer, there probably wouldn't be enough lawyers, but it's not happening. And that disconnect in the marketplace is something that we're looking to adjust so that, you know, certainly not everybody needs to have a lawyer. They're welcome to go it alone if they
Sure.
think they should or they can or it's better for them. But you know, we want to bring more people to lawyers and more lawyers to people, because I think there's a tremendous amount of work that, you know, really value added by the lawyer to the person who needs their assistance.
Yeah, and it's also a way for, particularly in today's business world and the competitive climate, to sort of protect yourself, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, sure, right.
Yeah,
I mean, it is. I mean,
yeah.
it's you know, it's hard to imagine, but I know a lot of people do it. But you know, buying houses without having a lawyer. I mean, you know, I don't know what you know, in different jurisdictions people charge different prices, but you might be talking a couple hundred to maybe a couple $100,000 on what's probably the biggest purchase that most people are going to make.
Right.
And they, you know, they don't use a lawyer to review the title, insurance, or whatever the product might be. So it's an interesting. I think you're right. I think they can add a lot of value, and part of that falls on the lawyer, I think, to be more transparent and let people know that this is what I do and this is what I charge, and it's probably not what they think.
Right. Because going back to your point, because I've seen this happen before, it's kind of the old saying, penny wise, pound foolish. You know,
Right.
okay, well, I've saved money on the attorney up front, but then something went wrong,
Right.
and now I've got to go to court with it, and it costs a fortune.
Yeah, well, that's true.
At that
I mean,
point, you know.
I mostly do work in the litigation field, and so I would say way more often than not, my cases involve people who chose not to use lawyers to get, you know, some certain documents crafted or reviewed even.
Right.
And yeah, it you know, most of the times there aren't problems, but when there are,
Right.
they're very expensive.
Yeah. Everything's okay till it's not.
Right, exactly.
One of the things that I'm sort of interested in, with everything changing, we talk about like the artificial technology, and we talk about how the internet's affecting things, and licensing and intellectual property and all. I mean, that's something, it seems to me, that the legal profession is going to have to continue to embrace and change and flex with, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you were a young person and you're looking at something really cutting edge, you know, we talk about self-driving cars, you know,
Right.
driverless cars. I mean, anything involving sort of this artificial intelligence. I mean, there's a decision-making paradigm that's happening, right? I mean, the cars, they drive themselves, but the computer has decided, you know, do they hit the brakes? Do they turn left? Do they turn right? So there's a lot. I think lawyers are missing the opportunity to be involved in the beginning, so that, you know, you can help guide and help hopefully avoid mistakes and problems. I mean, these systems are so sophisticated. I mean, they're going to be able to read, you know, people's faces, and if the car malfunctions, they're going to be able to decide: do I keep going and run into the school bus, or I take a left and run into this elderly person, or take a right and take my driver off the cliff? I mean, these are really fascinating decisions that are just coming into play.
Yeah. And I mean, in many ways, there will have to be new laws crafted in order to deal with this sort of stuff, because who becomes liable if something goes awry, right?
There's going to be a lot of new laws. I know the legislature just started a task force on cryptocurrencies, which, you know, I'm not smart enough to get into the weeds on that, but
Right.
I mean, you know, the Bitcoins and the way that transactions are being funded. I mean, it's not money. I mean, who uses money anymore? I was just talking to someone who was on vacation in Europe, and even the street performers. I mean, the way you tip them is like with your iPhone, like with your. I mean, there's not even change, not even a hat for a change. You just tap it with the iPhone, and you can give them a tip.
Oh my goodness! Wow. What's the biggest misconception the general public has about attorneys or
You know,
the legal field?
I think, well, one, I think they feel that most attorneys probably make a lot more money than they really do. I think they would be surprised that it's really not the case. Most attorneys being in small businesses, being in small firms, are like small businesses. They're challenging to run, just like any small business. So I think that would be a misconception. And I think just like everything else, there are, on the litigation side, I think people believe that attorneys are more litigious because of just a few cases that get news, right? Whereas most of the cases are nothing like the ones that become sensationalized.
Right. You're talking about like the McDonald's
Exactly.
spill the coffee in my lap,
Right.
and
Right.
most of the time that's like never even collected, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. What about yourself? How long will you serve as president of the Florida Bar?
So you serve as a year as president-elect, which I've already completed. Then you serve a year as president, and then you're finished, which is good. It's probably all you can take. It's it's not a paid position, right? So it's a lot. Florida's a big state, and we have a lot of lawyers and a lot of work. So I enjoy it. I really love it. I love the people, and it's been a lot of fun. But that's the term, and I think it's plenty.
Yeah. As you walk away from it, after you serve, what do you hope? What do you hope you let? What do you hope your signature says?
I really do hope that I just broaden our members, the lawyers' eyes on the value of utilizing technology in their practice. I've been saying for years that technology alone is not going to solve the problem, and lawyers alone are not going to solve the problem. It's really lawyers plus technology that is the best solution.
Yeah. And also just, I think just our conversation here, just kind of the opening your eyes or opening our audience's eyes to what all the legal profession really has to offer, more than what we just see on television or in the movies or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's great. I love getting out and speaking, connecting with the people, and it's really been a fun experience.
Good deal. And you'll just continue to practice law after this is over with. No aspirations for politics or anything fun like that.
Yeah, no, I don't have any political aspirations, but we'll see. I don't know what'll happen. This has been such a fun experience, so probably do mix a little something with the practice.
Wonderful. John Stewart, he is the president of the Florida Bar. Congratulations on being the 2019 president. Wish you all the very best.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. And we appreciate all your time and information. Fascinating discussion about the legal profession and the Florida Bar. Hopefully you were able to kind of understand a little bit better about what they do and how you can be affected by the bar and the legal community. By the way, you can see many more of our conversations, and actually quite a few of them with lawyers and legal type folks, at WSRE.org/conversations, as well as on YouTube. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Take wonderful care of yourself, and we'll see you soon.